He raised his glass and erased me in front of everyone. My name is Carol, 56, and for weeks I'd helped my son Evan plan his big promotion party. I wanted him to shine. I paid for the caterer, polished every glass, and hung lights across the patio until my back ached. That night, the house glowed with soft yellow warmth. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. People I barely knew hugged me like I'd done something noble. I thought for once we'd made it through the rough years. The divorce, the long nights when money was tight, the way I stretched my paycheck so Evan could go to college. When he stood at the center of the room, glass raised, I held my breath. He smiled that boyish grin that once melted my anger during his teenage fights. Then he said, "To those who taught me what not to be." Laughter rolled through the crowd. It hit me like cold water. I felt my cheeks burn as his wife clapped too hard. For a second, I hoped I'd misheard him, but his eyes slid past me as if I weren't there at all. Someone whispered, "That was bold." And another replied, "Guess he's got stories." I kept smiling, pretending it didn't matter. The flash from someone's phone caught my face in the moment between pride and pain. That photo would later tell the truth I couldn't show that night. After the toast, his boss came over. "You must be proud," he said, but his tone wavered. I managed a polite laugh. "Of course." He looked away, his jaw tight, as if holding something back. In the kitchen, I stacked plates and scrubbed the serving trays, even though the caterers were paid to do it. The sound of running water drowned the voices outside. My best friend Marcy came in with a glass of champagne. "He didn't mean it," she said softly. "You know how men are after a few drinks." "He meant it," I said. My voice didn't shake. He practiced that speech. He even joked earlier that he'd keep it real. I thought he meant honesty, not humiliation. Marcy sighed. "He's young. He'll regret it." I wanted to believe that, but I'd seen the way his wife smirked when the laughter hit me. That wasn't a mistake. It was theater. And the applause that followed was a curtain closing on the version of my son I thought I knew. Around 9:30, I carried the trash out to the bins. The night air felt heavy with perfume and heat. Behind me, I heard someone say, "Poor woman, she probably pushed him too hard." My hands clenched around the garbage bag. Every small kindness I'd given him, every meal, every dollar, suddenly felt like evidence used against me. I went back inside, smiling for photos. "Say cheese, Mom," Evan said. I did. The camera flash caught his grin, my hollow eyes, and the champagne flute trembling in my hand. Later, when the guests left and the laughter had drained away, the kitchen was a battlefield of crumbs and glasses. I rinsed them one by one, trying to wash the sting off my skin. His wife came in, avoiding my eyes. "You threw a great party," she said flatly. "Did I?" She shrugged. "People had fun." "Even me?" I asked. She didn't answer. When they left for their hotel, I sat at the table staring at the photo frame on the counter. Evan's graduation picture. He was 22 then, in his cheap suit and crooked tie, thanking me for never giving up on him. I'd framed that moment to remind myself motherhood was worth the cost. Now, it mocked me. By midnight, I packed leftovers into containers and stacked them in the fridge. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock. I caught my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, forced smile. Somewhere behind that glass, my son had rewritten who I was to him. The next morning I found a photo online from the party. Evan mid-toast, the caption reading, "From humble beginnings." I wasn't tagged. Maybe that was mercy, or maybe it was the final erasure. I told myself I wouldn't cry, but the truth pressed too hard. Betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it laughs in a crowded room while you stand there holding a glass, pretending it's fine. When I closed the browser, I caught my breath and whispered, "Something's off." The boss's glance, the uneasy silence afterward. It wasn't random. It was pity. And pity only comes when people already know what you don't. His boss's eyes said there was more I didn't know. The dishes clattered louder than the laughter in my head. I stood at the sink before sunrise, sleeves rolled, doing what I always do when shame hangs heavy. I cleaned. The kitchen was a map of last night. Plates leaned like tired faces. Sink water turned cloudy as I rinsed and stacked. On the counter sat a box with leftover cake, the frosting smudged where someone dragged a fork. The kettle hissed, a steady thread of sound that kept my hands moving. For a moment, routine felt like safety, and safety felt like control. My phone buzzed. "You're too sensitive," Evan wrote. It was a joke. I typed, erased, then typed again. It wasn't a joke to me. Another buzz. Everyone laughed. I answered, "I heard them." I stared at the bubbles sliding down the drain. My mind tried to bargain. If I agree it was nothing, the sting might fade. If I pretend I didn't hear the words, maybe the room didn't tilt. But the tilt was real. The line was crossed on purpose. Her name lit the screen. "It was a fun night," she wrote. "Don't make it weird." "Humiliating me was weird," I sent back. "Stop," she replied. "He's under stress. Big promotion." I swallowed. I had paid for the extra flowers and the last-minute glasses because the rental quote was higher than planned. I hadn't complained. I wanted the night to be smooth for him, not cheap. Dignity shouldn't require a receipt, but money sat under everything like a hidden nail. I set a boundary. "No more jokes about me," I texted. "Not in public, not ever." 3 dots pulsed, then vanished. My phone stayed dark. I wiped the table with deliberate strokes, saving the worst for last. The gift bag with the watch was tucked into a drawer. I had charged it on my card because I thought milestones deserve weight. Now it felt like a brick on my chest. I didn't return it. Not yet. Keeping it was a kind of record. Marcy called around 6. "You okay?" "I'm cleaning." I figured. He says I'm sensitive. He's dodging. He laughed. So did the crowd. Her voice steadied. "You're not crazy. I saw your face. It was a hit meant to land. I don't want a war." "Then don't fight. Tell the truth and keep the proof." "What proof?" "Start with your phone." I scrolled back and screenshotted the thread. I didn't name the act. I just did it. Simple steps help when your head wants to spin. A decision makes the day bearable. My stakes were clear. If I swallowed this, I'd swallow everything next. By 7, sunlight crept across the floor, thin as a blade. I opened the back door to breathe and shut it again when the morning carried the echo of last night's cheers. The cake box looked like a headline I didn't want to read. I took out one slice, then put it back. Sugar wasn't the fix. I needed a straight mind. Another message arrived. "We were celebrating. Don't ruin the mood," she wrote. I answered, "Respect is the mood." A beat passed. Then, "You're dramatic." I leaned on the counter, counting my breaths. A small voice inside tried to blame me. Maybe I had hovered, served too much, smiled too wide. Shame wants to charge interest. I refused to pay it. My phone rang. An unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered. "Thank you for last night," a man said. "This is Daniel." It took me a second. The boss. "You hosted beautifully," he said. "It ran like clockwork." "Glad to hear it." He paused. "You raised quite a man." The sentence landed soft but wrong, like a cushion hiding attack. I said thank you, and he said, "Of course," and silence filled the space like fog over water. There was something else he didn't say. I heard it in the careful tone, in the way he kept his words polished and short. He cleared his throat. "I hope you're resting today." "I'll manage." "Good," he said. "Take care." When the call ended, the kitchen felt colder. I set the phone down and dried my hands on a towel. I wanted to trust the world again, to believe last night could be a one-off, a slip solved by coffee and apologies. But the careful voice told me something different. It sounded like pity wrapped in manners. I gathered the screenshots into an album, then slid the cake box into the fridge so the counter looked clean. I wished order could be truth. I wished decency could be proof. I wished love could be enough. "Why am I the only one carrying this?" I whispered to the empty room. The question hung there, plain and hard. If respect is the floor, Then I had just found the edge. The phone was face up on the table. I kept looking at his name, waiting for the dots to return, waiting for anything that resembled an apology. The dots never came. Why did his boss sound sorry for me? My savings account was lighter, and so was my trust. It started that afternoon when I logged in to pay the plumber. I'd saved for weeks to cover the repair, setting aside a small cushion for emergencies. But the number on the screen didn't look right. Half my balance was gone. My stomach tightened. I scrolled through the transactions, each one a small betrayal in black and white. Transfers, 4 of them, each marked with Evan's name. The same Evan who had promised to repay me next payday, months ago. I stared at the monitor until my reflection blurred in the glare. "No," I whispered. He wouldn't. But he had. I called him right away. "Evan, did you take money from my account?" "What are you talking about?" he said. "I'm looking at the withdrawals." He paused, then laughed. "Mom, you must have moved it yourself. You're not great with online stuff." "I printed the receipts." "You're overreacting." The air between us turned sharp. I felt old, foolish, smaller than I'd felt since his father left years ago. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. An hour later, his wife called. "You can't accuse him like that," she said. "You'll ruin his confidence at work." "He took my savings." "You loaned it to him," she snapped. "You're forgetting again." I nearly dropped the phone. "Don't talk to me like that." "I'm trying to help," she said, her voice sugary now. "You get mixed up sometimes." Gaslighting comes wrapped in concern. I ended the call and sat at the kitchen table. The house smelled faintly of detergent from the morning laundry. Clean things didn't make me feel clean inside. I printed the statements and slid them into an envelope. My hands shook as the paper fed through the printer, the noise too loud for such a quiet house. I sealed the envelope and placed it in the drawer beside the old watch I'd bought for him. The same watch he'd never worn. Money shouldn't define love, but it always exposes it. When people owe you and stop respecting you, the debt turns personal. By evening, I tried again. "Evan, we need to talk," I said when he picked up. He sighed. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "I'm missing thousands of dollars. That's not proportion. That's theft. You gave me permission." "I didn't." "Then prove it." 3 words. They fell like stones. I opened the drawer and touched the envelope. The paper felt heavier than it should, like it carried everything that used to live unspoken between us. After he hung up, I sat staring at the kitchen clock. It read 8:15 p.m. The second hand moved steady, unbothered, as if time itself had chosen a side. I thought about all the times I'd bailed him out, the credit card debt in college, the rent when his wife lost her job, the extra cash I slipped him when the baby was on the way. Every dollar had come from hours at my part-time job, from packed lunches and canceled vacations. My generosity had become his right. I whispered, "This isn't forgetting. This is theft." Saying it out loud changed something. The fear shrank, replaced by resolve. I knew now that my silence was the only thing he was counting on. I picked up the phone and called the bank. "I'd like to report unauthorized transfers," I told the woman on the line. She asked for dates, amounts, my email. I gave her everything. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. When she promised to open an inquiry, I thanked her, even though my throat ached. When I hung up, the house felt colder. I went to the window and looked out into the dark. The street was empty, the kind of quiet that makes every thought louder. I remembered the way Daniel, his boss, had looked at me at the party, the almost pity in his eyes. Maybe he already knew what my son had done. Maybe he'd seen this side of him before I did. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to check my phone. I poured coffee, but it tasted bitter no matter how much sugar I added. Betrayal leaves that taste. It coats everything. I folded the bank statement again, neat and tight, and slipped it back into the envelope. I touched it like a wound and whispered, "You said I couldn't prove it." Then I smiled just a little. "But maybe I can." He said I couldn't prove it, but I planned to. Truth leaks where pride tries to plug the holes. By late morning, I carried a pastry box through the glass doors, trying to trade sugar for calm. The lobby hummed with phones and printers. A steady whir came from the copier, a thin mechanical buzz that made every whisper easier to hear. I told the guard I was dropping off a thank you, and he waved me through. I wasn't here to argue. I wanted simple peace and a small apology that might fix the crack. I'd already spent enough on last night. I didn't need more damage. At 11:40 a.m., I paid for parking and rode the elevator up. I told myself small kindness beats pride. My hands felt steady but light, the way they do when you're not sure if you're brave or just tired. Outside the bullpen, 2 employees stood shoulder to shoulder, a clipboard tucked under one arm. One leaned in. "That's her," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "The mother with the missing money." I froze. "She drained his account," the other answered. "He's covering for her." My heart knocked once, hard. The pastry box dipped in my grip. I stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said. "Say that again." They straightened, faces smooth. "I misheard," I added, keeping my voice even. "Right?" "Office chatter," one said. "Nothing." "Rumors," the other added, eyes sliding away. I took a breath and set a boundary. "Do not use my name with lies," I said. "Not here, not anywhere." Their silence confirmed everything. Pride had found a microphone, and it was my son's. Daniel turned the corner, saw me, and quickened his pace. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, steering me toward a side hall. I matched his stride, knuckles white around the pastry string. "I came with a peace offering," I said, "but I heard something I can't ignore." "Not in the open," he said. "Please." We stopped near a supply closet. I heard the hiss of the copier again, like a long, careful shush. I lifted the box. "Take these. I'm leaving." "Don't," he said gently. "You didn't deserve what I just heard." "So it's everywhere." He hesitated. "The story is moving." "His story," I said. I reached into my bag and felt for the envelope I'd started carrying. The bank printouts, folded tight. Paper felt solid when people didn't. "He's telling them I took from him," I said. "He used the party to warm up the crowd. Then he fed them a script. If I stay quiet, he erases me completely. That's the cost." A young woman walked by with a clipboard held like a shield. She glanced at me, then at Daniel, then away. "Shame has a root. It prefers hallways." "I won't cause a scene," I said, "but I'm not leaving the truth at home anymore." "Let me handle it," he said. "Not like this. There are channels." "Channels haven't paid my bills," I replied. "I bought his celebration on my card, and now I'm buying parking to be called a thief." He winced. "I'm sorry." "I don't need sorry," I said. "I need the rumor to stop." Near the copier, a pair of voices sparked again, low, bright, practiced. "She's desperate." "He's a saint for not pressing charges." My jaw tightened. People love simple tales, a suffering son, a greedy mother. It costs them nothing to pass along. I stepped back toward the noise and kept my words small and sharp. "Say it again." They looked at me, startled. "Say it to me," I added. No one spoke. 3 lines, I said softly, mostly to myself. Truth, lie, consequence. I turned to Daniel. "I'm choosing the first one." A tight exchange flared, quick as flint. "Back off." "Stop smearing me. You can't tell us what to say." "I can set my line." Their eyes flicked to Daniel. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm leaving the box at reception," I said. "No more back rooms, no more whispers. I won't walk into his world without someone who can hear and remember." Witness. That word steadied me. The next time I step in here, it won't be alone. I placed the pastries on a table and looked at the clipboard, the blank forms clipped tight. Paper could trap lies or free them, depending on who held the pen. I kept my envelope close. I didn't show it. Not yet. 1 on-stage fact per step. That was my rule now. Daniel drew a breath, eyes on the floor, then on me. The hall seemed to shrink around his next words, like the building knew what they meant. He leaned closer, voice barely above the copier's hush. His boss whispered, "You need to see what he's hiding. Some secrets hide in plain sight until you open the wrong drawer." When Daniel called and asked me to meet him at the office after hours, I knew something had shifted. The building was nearly empty, just the hum of air vents and the faint tapping of someone typing a few floors below. The fluorescent glow flattened everything, even guilt. He stood by his desk, a file in his hand, jaw tight. "You didn't get this from me," he said quietly. I took it, careful not to meet his eyes. The folder was thin, but heavy in its meaning. Inside were copies of company expense reports, signed by Evan. Each sheet listed purchases that didn't belong to his job: electronics, hotel charges, even restaurant bills from nights I remembered him saying he was working late. At the bottom of each page, his handwriting curved with that same proud stroke he'd had since childhood. "He's been claiming reimbursements for personal spending," Daniel said. "The audit team caught inconsistencies. When I saw your name come up in one note, I knew you deserved to know." "My name?" He nodded. "There's a transfer labeled as repayment to a family lender. We thought it was a vendor. Turns out, it's your account." The words settled like dust, quiet and suffocating. "So that's why he drained my savings," I whispered. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't be telling you this." "You should," I answered. "Someone should." I stared at the stack. The paper edges dug into my fingers. For a moment, I imagined him as a boy, sitting at our old kitchen table with homework scattered everywhere, asking for help spelling responsibility. Now he was writing my ruin into an expense form. "I don't want to hurt him," I said. Daniel sighed. "I know, but you deserve to protect yourself." That night, I drove home slow. The roads blurred with streetlight reflections, and every mile felt like another question I didn't want to ask. At home, I unlocked the small drawer in my desk and took out the envelope, the bank statements, the screenshots, the proof I'd gathered like small acts of defense. I placed the file beside them. The papers didn't belong together, but they told one story: a son who'd used both his company and his mother to cover his debts. I sat there staring at it all. The clock read 9:05 p.m. Time kept moving, even when I couldn't. I whispered, "He knew exactly what he was doing." Saying it out loud didn't ease the ache. It just made it real. Then came the quiet battle between heart and reason. If I called HR, his career would crumble. The gossip would be merciless. His wife would blame me for everything. But if I stayed silent, I'd become the lie he'd built. Every word he'd spread, unstable, forgetful, too emotional, would stick. Silence was the cage he hoped I'd accept. I opened my laptop, typed HR contact, and stared at the screen. The cursor blinked like a dare. I typed a message. "I need to report misconduct involving an employee in finance." My fingers hovered above the send key. Then the memories came. Birthday cakes, scraped knees, his small voice saying, "Mom, I'll pay you back someday." Maybe this was how payback looked in his world: neat signatures and hidden ledgers. The weight of the folder beside me felt almost human, paper and ink replacing trust and love. I thought about the hours I'd spent at my part-time job just to save enough to help him get through college. I'd skipped dental work, canceled a trip I'd dreamed of taking, all for him to have a better chance than I did. Now I realized he'd used that same education to rob me blind and smile through it. I closed my eyes. My chest hurt, but beneath the ache was something colder, a growing clarity. This wasn't about motherhood anymore. It was about boundaries, about not letting him steal the last piece of me that still believed in him. I opened my eyes, took a deep breath, and placed the file into a larger envelope. I sealed it shut with tape, pressed the edges flat, and wrote a single word on top: proof. I wasn't ready to deliver it yet, but I would. I picked up my phone, scrolled to HR's number, and pressed call. My thumb hovered. trembling. For a full minute, I just listened to the faint ticking of the clock behind me. The sound of my hesitation measured second by second. My hand shook once, twice. I dialed HR, then froze before pressing send. When they answered, my heart stopped pretending. I sat at the table with the phone in one hand and a manila folder in the other. The folder edges were rough against my palm, a small scrape that kept me rooted in the moment. It was just past 10, late morning light across the table, and I told myself this was not revenge. This was a line I had to draw to keep the rest of me intact. "Human resources," a calm voice said. "How can I help you today?" "I need to report misconduct," I said. "I have documents, bank withdrawals, and company expenses." "Take your time," she said. "Tell me what you saw." I spoke slowly. I described the transfers, the false charges, the rumor that named me as the thief. I kept my words plain, the way you do when truth already hurts. Papers slid under my hand as I read dates and amounts. The seconds stretched thin. When I finished, she paused, then said, "You're doing the right thing." That sentence broke something open. Not regret, grief, the kind that comes when you finally name what you've lost. "What happens next?" I asked. "We'll create a record," she said. "We'll need copies of what you have. Are you safe to send them by email today?" "Yes," I said. "I can send them now." "We'll acknowledge receipt," she said. "You may be contacted by our audit team. Keep anything related. Don't delete messages." I thanked her, ended the call, and set the phone on the table like it might crack. The clock on the stove blinked 10:22. I breathed once, twice, and started scanning. Each click felt like a small confession I owed to myself. I attached the bank pages and the expense sheets, wrote a brief note, and hit send. A soft whoosh, then silence. By afternoon, my phone rang again. "What did you do?" His voice was tight. "I reported what I found." "You're ruining my life. You did that yourself. You hate me. I want the truth." He exhaled hard, then hung up. My hands shook. I placed the phone on the folder to steady both. A few minutes later, a voicemail arrived from her. I let it play on speaker, short and vicious. "You're sick. You need help. Take your lies back before he loses everything." I saved it without a word. Proof mattered more than pride. I made tea and stared at the steam. The apartment was quiet in the heavy way a room gets after a storm. I wanted to call Marcy, but I didn't. I needed to hear my own mind. If I backed down now, I would spend the rest of my life paying interest on this pain. The stakes were simple: my name or my silence. The email badge flashed. "We received your materials," the message read. "Your report is logged. A case number, a polite closing, and a request. Please reply if anything changes." I typed one line back, "I will," and hit send again. The folder on the table looked thinner now that it had passed part of its weight to someone else. Near 3, Daniel called. "I heard there's a complaint," he said. "I made it." A pause. "Good. Will they listen?" "They'll have to." "Will you stand by what you know?" "Yes," he said. "I will." Another hour passed. I checked my checking balance to calm myself and felt the anger rise again. Rent, utilities, the credit card charge for that party order, all of it stacked like bricks. I wasn't chasing money. I was defending the ground I stand on. The phone buzzed once more. A text. "You've gone too far." I answered with 4 words. "The truth goes farther." I gathered the scans into a new desktop folder and labeled it plainly. Then I slid the real pages back into the manila one and tucked it inside the desk. I touched the top and told myself I could survive a season of being called cruel. I couldn't survive being erased. Evening came on slow. A thin gold line crossed the wall. I finished my tea, washed the cup, dried it, and set it upside down as if order could bless the night. My phone chimed. I opened the new email and read it twice, steady and clear. HR asked me to come in for questioning. 4 faces watched me like I was the one on trial. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and nerves. I sat at the end of a long table, my folder beside a glass of water that trembled each time I moved my hand. Across from me sat 2 auditors, one HR manager, and Daniel. His eyes met mine for a second before dropping to his notes. The lead auditor cleared her throat. "This meeting is being documented. Please confirm your name." I did. "Did you ever handle company funds?" she asked. My pulse jumped. "No," I said. "Never." She scribbled something. "We've received a statement suggesting otherwise." I looked at Daniel. His jaw tightened. He wouldn't meet my eyes again. "I believe your son claimed you had temporary access to his account during an equipment order," she continued. "He says you misunderstood internal reimbursements as personal withdrawals." It hit like cold water. "So now I'm the thief," I said quietly. Silence filled the space. I opened my folder and spread the papers out, the bank statements, the expense reports, and the voicemail I'd saved. "These are copies of transactions tied to his employee ID. This one," I pointed, "shows the reimbursement logged under a fake vendor. And this," I held up the printout, "shows the same amount leaving my savings." The room stayed still. You could hear the faint hum of the overhead light. "I didn't come here to accuse anyone," I said. "I came because the lies followed me to your hallways, because a rumor was planted to cover a crime." The HR manager looked at the evidence, her expression unreadable. "Would you mind if we verify these?" "Please do," I said. "I'll wait." One of the auditors left with the pages. The others stayed, writing notes in silence. The glass of water caught a ripple of light, distorting the reflection of my hand. I noticed my fingers shaking. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was steady but low. "She's telling the truth." The words landed like a gavel. For a second, no one moved. The lead auditor looked up. "Can you confirm that?" "I've seen the expense patterns," he said. "They match what she brought." The HR manager exhaled. "Then we'll suspend him pending review." My throat burned, but I managed a nod. It wasn't victory. It was something quieter, heavier. The lead auditor gathered the papers. "We'll need to keep these copies." "Keep them," I said. "I have backups." When the meeting ended, I stood up slowly. Daniel walked me to the door. "You just saved the company a scandal," he murmured. "I didn't want to save the company," I said. "I wanted to save the truth." He hesitated, then said, "It might be both." I nodded and stepped out into the hallway. My legs felt like they'd been replaced with air. The glass door clicked behind me, sealing in whatever version of the story they'd write next. For a moment, I leaned against the wall, breathing in the faint smell of toner and paper. Evidence of lives turned into documents. Outside, the afternoon sun hit the windows in sharp streaks. I squinted, realizing how long it had been since I'd stepped into daylight without dread. The relief didn't feel clean. It felt like loss wearing a borrowed face. As I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed in my purse. One message flashed on the screen, short and bitter. Evan's wife texted, "You'll regret this, Carol." In our small town, gossip moves faster than justice. By noon the next day, faces turned away on my street. I kept the curtain half closed and tracked the eyes that paused at my mailbox. Sight tells the truth. It showed how quickly kindness curdles. Someone had posted my picture with a caption that stung. "Jealous mother exposes her son," it said. I closed the laptop and felt the room shrink. Groceries arrived at 5:30 p.m., dropped on the mat like a verdict. I signed the receipt with a steady hand and a shaky heart, thinking about the balance left after last week's repair and the party bill still on my card. My name, once small, had turned into a headline people paid nothing to repeat. At the mailbox, I found 3 notes without signatures. One said, "Mothers stand by their sons." Another said, "Move away if you're ashamed." The last was only a printed screenshot of my face, party lights behind me, with the comment thread clipped off. I held it until my fingers hurt, then slid everything into an envelope I didn't label. Silence isn't neutral. It chooses the loudest voice. By evening, the phone started again. Unknown numbers, soft threats. 3 lines hid in a row. Take it back. He feeds you. You need help. I let them stack like empty boxes and called Marcy. Tell me straight, I said. They're scared, she answered. Of what? The truth that money exposes. Her voice steadied me the way a railing steadies a climb. I told her I'd cut back to stay afloat. Heat low, cheaper food, no treats. If the board did nothing, the bills would. A neighbor I'd waved to for years crossed the street when he saw me. I lifted a hand anyway and held the gate open. He pretended not to notice. I went back inside and stood behind the curtain, the fabric cool against my cheek, watching the sidewalk soak up the last of the day. Children coasted by on bikes, parents smiled for them, and I wondered how fast those smiles would turn if one lie reached the right ear. At 7:10 p.m., Daniel called. You're not alone, he said. The board meets soon. Will they act? They have to. I'm breaking under this, I admitted. Hold on, he said, and for the first time that day, I believed I could. After we hung up, I checked the door twice and counted the cash left in the jar by the stove. Enough for a week if I stretched it, not enough for a setback. I told myself I could sell the watch if rent came due and the account still bled. The weather changed after dark, and the street emptied. My window showed my reflection and the pulse of the porch light. I let the curtain fall and breathed through the ache behind my ribs. The quiet wasn't peace, it was pressure. I wrote a line on a sticky note and pressed it to the fridge. Keep the record, keep your name. I printed the worst page from the gossip thread and set it beside the phone. If anyone asked why I fought, I could point without raising my voice. I wished there were cheaper ways to be heard. Truth, it turns out, charges full price. Near 9, a car slowed, then moved on. I watched its taillights fade and told myself I could sleep. Sleep didn't come. I made tea and stood by the sink until the steam cleared and the cup ran cold. I thought about the party bill, the repair, the rent, and how many ways a woman can be punished for telling the truth. I told myself again that the stakes were simple: my name or my silence. Then I heard the mail slot snap, a single metal click that sounded final. Then a letter arrived from the company's legal department. They called it due process. I called it survival. The envelope was thick and heavy, its paper too fine for mercy. My name printed across the top looked strange, almost like it belonged to someone else. Inside was the notice: a formal hearing in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to prove I wasn't the villain my own child had made me out to be. I laid the letter flat on the kitchen table and ran my fingers along its edge. It felt cold, like the handle of a door that might not open again. By noon, I had decided to hire a lawyer. Not one of those glossy ones with downtown offices, someone modest, affordable, grounded. The man I found, Mr. Howard, had thinning hair and a soft voice. He scanned the documents and said, "They'll question your motives." "Let them," I said. "I'm not the one who lied." He looked at me for a moment before replying, "You'd be surprised how easy it is to make truth look petty in rooms like these." That night, I couldn't sleep. The clock showed 11:46 p.m. Sat at the same table with the pile of papers I'd gathered since this began. The bank receipts, the expense reports, the printed gossip threads, and that voicemail I'd saved even when it made my stomach turn. Every page carried a story that no one wanted to hear but me. I reread them until the numbers blurred and the ink started to look like bruises on white skin. In the morning, I called my sister. "It's official," I said. "I saw the post," she whispered. "Are you okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "But I'm going." "You're braver than you think." "Bravery doesn't pay bills." She sighed, then said, "I know, but it's the only thing they can't take from you." The rent notice was already on the counter. I'd missed the due date by 4 days. I thought about selling the ring I'd worn for 25 years, the one I'd never taken off even after the marriage fell apart. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I went to the pawn shop on Main Street, handed over the ring, and walked out with $320. I told myself it was just money, but my hand felt naked all the way home. Each night that week, I prepared for the hearing like it was a final exam written in heartbreak. Mr. Howard helped me organize everything into folders. "You'll speak clearly," he said. "They'll try to twist it, but stay calm." "I can do calm," I told him, though my hands trembled every time I touched those documents. He smiled faintly. "That's not calm. That's conviction." On the 7th day, the HR office sent another email confirming the hearing location. The courthouse annex. Neutral ground, they called it. I thought of how many people had stood in that same room, swearing to tell the truth and hoping someone would believe them. I wondered if Evan had been told. I wondered if he'd show up. I set the envelope back on the table and traced the embossed seal. Every choice I'd made since the party had led here. I could have ignored the file, deleted the proof, let him rebuild his lies and call it family loyalty. But I didn't. I crossed the line and named what he did. And now I was paying the price in rent, in friends, in quiet rooms that echoed too loudly. The night before the hearing, I packed a small folder with everything I had left, documents, receipts, and a single photo of him as a boy, missing his front tooth, smiling at me like I was still his hero. I pressed that photo between the pages, not sure if it was armor or evidence. When dawn came, I dressed simply. No jewelry, no makeup, no mask. Just truth, folded and ready. I poured coffee into a travel cup, locked the door, and stared for a long moment at the empty spot where the ring used to sit on my finger. The courthouse stood quiet when I arrived. Morning light reflected off its steps, sharp and clear. I could hear my own breath as I climbed. A guard opened the door, nodding politely. I stepped inside and felt the weight of every choice settle on my shoulders. I walked into the hearing room, alone. Justice feels cold until it finally burns. The boardroom was built to be louder than doubt. A low hum from the vents held the room. The microphone waited at the center of the table, and a document stack sat in front of me. At 10:03 a.m., the arbiter called us to order. I reminded myself of the stakes. My name, not a narrative written for me. Evan entered with a lawyer who whispered fast. He wouldn't look at me. The panel began with questions, then tightened the circle. State your role. Explain the reimbursements. Who authorized transfers tied to your family? Each answer tried to soften the edges. Each time, the room grew sharper. They played the voicemail I had saved. They read the rumor thread that painted me a thief. They laid out expense charts in lines. I slid a copy of the bank page across the table. Daniel confirmed dates and patterns. The arbiter asked for clarity and got it. The numbers matched, the signatures matched, and the timeline fit like a key. His lawyer leaned close. Say you misunderstood. Evan swallowed. I misunderstood. The arbiter nodded once. Then who moved the money? Silence. Papers shifted. I heard a pen tap, light and constant. I spoke when invited, not before. I loaned money before the promotion party, I said. I never authorized access to my savings. The withdrawals continued after I asked them to stop. When I questioned him, the smear began. The arbiter asked for proof. I pointed to the copies, to the printouts, to the folder I built one night at a time. Nobody argued with paper. They only tried to distract from it. The confrontation spiked clean and fast. Did you tell them I stole? I told them I covered you. That isn't truth. It is now. I steadied my breath and let the room hear. The panel moved on. The legal officer asked about hotels and electronics billed to the company. Daniel explained the audit trail. Mr. Howard added a line about motive, debt, and image. I kept my eyes on the microphone, because staring at steel is easier than staring at a face you used to trust. Then came the line that cracked the shell. The arbiter said, "This is your final chance to clarify." Hush. Evan's shoulders fell. "It wasn't her," he said. "It was me." No one rushed to fill the silence. The words finally had room to live and do their work. I didn't feel triumph. I felt heat rise in my chest like air after a winter door swings open. The board read measures: suspension, restitution review, referral to authorities as required. Someone asked if I needed a recess. "No," I said. "I'm steady now." The arbiter thanked me for my honesty. The microphone caught a faint tremor in my reply, but I did not sit back down. Outside, the corridor carried stillness. Mr. Howard said, "They believed you." I nodded. "They believed the documents," he smiled. "That's what belief looks like here." I thought of the legal bill waiting at home, of the ring I sold, of the watch in my drawer. Some victories arrive with invoices. Daniel met me by the elevators. "You weren't just right," he said. "You were brave." I said, "I was necessary." He asked if I wanted company. I told him no, alone. I touched the document stack once more and left it with the clerk, because truth belongs in the record now, not only in my hands. On the steps, the afternoon air scraped smoke from my lungs. I listened to the city noise, traffic, wheels, a shoe on stone. My phone vibrated. Messages piled up, some kind, some cruel. I saved none. I bought a bus ticket with the cash left in my wallet and sat by the window, letting the movement steady me. But truth always costs more than it pays. Victory doesn't heal. It only stops the bleeding. The days after the hearing were quieter than I expected. Evan resigned before the week ended. No grand statement, no apology, just a typed letter sent through corporate email and a line at the bottom, effective immediately. I heard through Daniel that his wife had left town, saying I'd destroyed their family. Maybe I had, though it was already cracked before I ever spoke. A white envelope arrived 2 days later from the company. Restitution, they called it. The amount barely covered the legal fees. I opened it at the table where I'd once balanced bills, the same table that held every lie I'd had to prove. I whispered to no one, "So, that's what truth is worth." Mornings turned into a kind of waiting. At 8 a.m., the first sunlight slid through the curtain, and I'd sit beside it with coffee, tracing the patterns on the resignation letter like it might change shape. My sister called every afternoon. "You did what no one else could," she said. I answered, "But did it fix anything?" She hesitated before saying, "You fixed yourself." That sounded like something people say when there's nothing left to fix outside you. Neighbors started speaking again, cautious but polite. Some avoided eye contact. Others waved from their porches like the months of gossip hadn't happened. A few left casseroles on the step without a note. One of them must have known I'd pawned my ring and sold the car. Pride had kept me walking to the grocery store instead of taking the bus. Now, the check from the company meant I could at least settle the overdue rent. I counted it twice, made the deposit, and told myself that survival was its own kind of wealth. Daniel called once more. "It's over," he said. "Nothing like this ever ends," I told him. "Maybe not," he said, "but people will move on." I thought about the people who could, and the one who couldn't, my son. The silence between us was longer than punishment. It was absence with a pulse. One afternoon. I opened a drawer and looked at the envelope of evidence. The edges had softened from handling. Inside were the receipts, the printed emails, and that one photo of him smiling years ago. I'd kept them together so I'd never forget how close love and loss can sit. I almost threw the whole thing out, but I stopped. Let memory earn its place, I thought. Time did its slow kind of work. The garden out back started to bloom again, the weeds forgiving my neglect. I spent an entire day cleaning the house, clearing papers, and packing away what I couldn't face daily. Every surface I wiped felt like a confession, every object a question I couldn't answer. I found myself staring at the window often, watching the sun dip lower each evening. The light landed on the curtain in soft bands, almost gentle, as if trying to prove that warmth could return without permission. By the end of the month, I could breathe without remembering the sound of his voice in that room. But justice, I learned, doesn't comfort. It just stops the bleeding long enough for you to see what's been lost. The silence had grown familiar, and even that felt like progress. I made tea and stood by the window again. The neighborhood was quiet. The curtain moved slightly from the draft, and I almost thought it whispered. Then the doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected. I froze, cup halfway to my lips. Through the window, I saw a figure on the porch. Daniel, the boss who'd once looked away, now standing there with his hands clasped. Then one evening, the boss knocked on my door. Closure arrived in a modest suit and gentle eyes. He stood on my porch with an envelope in one hand and a small smile that wasn't sure it was welcome. The air had a chill. The cup I carried from the kitchen warmed my fingers. He said my name like a question, and I opened the door. Paper meets skin in a way you can't mistake. The letter inside was thick, the fold sharp enough to press a ridge into my thumb as I slid it free. Daniel stepped in and glanced at the tidy table. "May I sit?" I nodded and set a teacup in front of him. Steam rose, then thinned. He took a slow breath, then said, "This is overdue." His voice quiet. An apology from the company signed by the board for the harm, the rumors, the failure to act sooner. I read the first lines and felt my chest pull tight. The words were simple and plain. I had learned to trust simple and plain. He watched me read. "You reminded us what integrity looks like," he said. "I forgot it once. It cost me a brother for 5 years." I looked up. He went on. "We didn't speak from pride. When I saw you fight through fear and keep your record clean, I remembered what I should have done." "You looked away at first," I said. "That day by the copier." "I did," he answered. "And I'm sorry." "People believe what is easy," I said. "They do," he said. "You didn't." We drank in a quiet that didn't punish. At 2:15 p.m., the light on the floor shifted toward the doorway, and I realized the afternoon had moved without me noticing. He asked if I had enough to get by. I told him the restitution helped and the rent was current, but the lawyer's bill left a gap. "I'm not asking," I said. "I'm just telling the truth of it." He nodded. "The board added a stipend for costs tied to the case. Modest, but real. It's in the envelope." I brushed the edge with my finger and felt steadier than the number could make me. He reached for the teacup. "May I be blunt?" I nodded again. "You carried a burden we put on you when we bought a story. I won't buy stories like that again." He paused. "There's talk of a compliance role, part-time. Interview only if you want it. No pressure." I smiled at the table. "I want to be useful," I said. "I don't want to be defined by what he did." The conversation found a rhythm. We spoke about families, about how money gets used as a weapon when pride needs armor. He admitted he recognized the pattern months back, but waited for proof to harden around it. "Waiting can be its own kind of harm," I said. He looked ashamed and didn't hide it. I respected that more than his speech. We had a small confrontation, quick and clean. "You knew something," I said. "I suspected," he said. "You heard them smear me." "I did. And you stayed quiet. For a while." "That silence cut," I said. "I know." He didn't reach for excuses. He only set the empty cup down and asked if there was anything he could carry now that would make a difference. I told him to carry the next woman like me, the one who shows up with a folder and a shaking hand. "Believe her sooner than you believed me," I said. He promised he would. I believed him enough for today. We walked to the door. He rested his fingers on the envelope's flap. "Keep the letter," he said, "not as proof for others, as proof for you." I nodded. "I'll file it beside the receipts," I said, "and the photo." He studied my face. "You miss him." I didn't answer. Some grief stands on its own feet. On the step, he hesitated. "If you need a reference for the interview or for anything, use my name." I thanked him. He looked at the garden. "You kept it alive," he said, "even when everything else wilted." "Living costs less than lying," I said. He laughed once softly. "Sometimes it does." When he left, I closed the door and traced the crease of the letter again, the paper firm under my thumb. I placed it in the drawer with the envelope that had carried all the worst days, then set my teacup on the table and let the warmth fade slowly. The room felt different, not larger, just rightly measured. I wrote one line on a scrap of paper and slid it into the drawer with the rest. "Keep the record, keep yourself." Washed the cup and stood at the window while it dried. The curtain lifted and settled like breath. Peace didn't flood the house, but a square of it took its place on the table, and I left it there, undisturbed. I turned to the counter, opened the laptop, and checked the day's emails. Unread messages, 2 from the board, 1 from the clinic about a bill, and 1 more farther down. The subject held a single name that made my hands go still. But one name lingered in my inbox. Evan. His words came printed, not spoken. The envelope arrived late in the day, thin but deliberate, my name written in the same looping hand I'd once praised on school papers. For a long moment, I just looked at it. The paper caught a stripe of late afternoon light, gold fading into shadow. My hands hesitated. After everything, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what he'd finally chosen to say. When I opened it, the first line stopped me cold. I don't deserve forgiveness. The ink pressed hard into the paper, as if he had to make the words stay. He confessed everything, the transfers, the false story, the gossip he'd fed when fear made him small. He wrote that he'd been jealous, that the company saw in me the integrity he lacked, and that every lie had been a way to keep his image from collapsing. I thought if I blamed you, he wrote, I could still feel like a good man. I had to set the letter down. My eyes blurred, and I wiped them with the sleeve of my sweater. The kitchen clock read 6:42 p.m. I'd been waiting for something like this, though I didn't know if I was ready to hold it. I read on. The board offered me work in another state, he said. Daniel spoke for me. He said truth doesn't erase wrong, but it can guide what's next. I'm going to take it. I won't contact you until I've earned the right to. I whispered to the quiet room, You already had that right. The words sounded strange out loud, half mercy, half disbelief. His next line cut deeper. You were never the enemy, Mom. I was. There it was, the word he hadn't said in months. It felt like a hand reaching from across the wreckage, trembling but real. He ended with, Don't write back. Let this be what it is. I'll carry it until I can come home and face you without lies. I folded the paper once, then again, as if smaller might hurt less. Tears came slow, measured, like the body rationing relief. I realized I wasn't crying because he was leaving. I was crying because he finally understood what he'd done. Regret isn't justice, but it's a start. The house felt too still. I walked to the drawer where the evidence had lived, the receipts, the files, the apology from the board, and placed his letter among them. It didn't belong to guilt anymore. It belonged to truth. Then I reached for the candle on the counter. Its wax had melted unevenly from nights I'd kept it burning, waiting for closure that never came. I lit it again and watched the small flame catch. It wavered, bright but unsteady. For a long time, I just watched it. The flame bent when I breathed, then straightened again. I thought of him as a boy, blowing out birthday candles, his cheeks puffed with hope. He used to make the same wish every year, to make something of himself. Maybe this was him keeping that wish in a harder way. I sat down and reread one line near the end. I learned what not to be. He'd said that the night of the party, sharp and careless. Now it carried weight. I traced it with my fingertip, not to erase it, but to remember it. We never stop being parents, even when the child walks away. Outside, the last light of evening slipped across the window. I thought about how forgiveness doesn't need an audience, how sometimes the kindest act is silence. I didn't write him back. Some words should stay between paper and conscience. When the flame dipped, I leaned closer. Wherever you are, I whispered, make it right. The wax gathered in a pool, reflecting the smallest shimmer of heat, like a heart that still beats despite the scar. The flame flickered like a final goodbye. Peace doesn't announce itself. It just arrives one morning. I woke earlier than usual and sat at the kitchen table with morning coffee and the newspaper folded to the local section. The room was quiet enough to hear the rustle as I turned the page. The sound steadied me. I had expected fireworks after the hearing. Instead, peace came like a bill paid. No fuss, A cleared balance. The article was small, but clear. It said the company reformed its ethics board and tightened expense controls. My name wasn't shouted. It was noted in one line as the complaint that started the review. I traced the print with my thumb and let the words settle. Recognition without noise felt right. I didn't need a podium. I needed my life back. A neighbor texted, "Saw the news, proud of you." Another wrote nothing but a heart. I answered with a simple thank you and set the phone aside. The stakes were still simple. Keep my dignity, keep my peace. I could not afford to spend either again. At 8:15 a.m., sunlight slid across the table, warming the mug. I wrapped both hands around it and breathed slow. I remembered counting dollars for that lawyer, selling the last ring I kept after the divorce, choosing groceries over new shoes. Worth it, I said. The coffee tasted stronger today. Maybe that was me. I didn't go to the press meeting. "You should be there," my sister said on the phone. "Let them see you." I smiled and looked at the headline again. "They've seen enough," I said. "I just want quiet." She exhaled and softened. "Then let the quiet be your prize." I tested the quiet like a new floor. Step by step, it held. I added up what still needed repair. A small credit card balance, a leaky faucet, a garden I'd ignored while my life burned. They felt like normal problems, the kind you fix with time and a weekend budget. I planned to put the restitution check toward the balance and set aside a little for an emergency fund. No grand gestures, just steady ground. 3 short knocks sounded at the door. For a second, my chest tightened, then eased when I heard my neighbor call my name. "Coffee later?" she asked. "My treat." I opened the door enough to smile. "Tomorrow," I said. "I'm staying in today." "Understood," she said. "You earned it." I went back to the table and read the article again, slower this time. Spikes of memory still rose. The office whispers, the hard chair in the hearing, his face, when the truth cracked open. I pressed my palm on the newspaper and let the paper's edge remind me that endings can be sharp and still be safe. Words arrived in my head as small lines, and I spoke them aloud. I stand. I keep the record. I am done begging. I paused between each line, letting them mark the room. The rustle from the newspaper answered like a reply, and the kettle clicked as it cooled. The house accepted me as I was. By late morning, I stacked the newspaper on the counter and rinsed the cup. I checked my bank app, not to worry, but to witness. The numbers were plain, not hiding from me. I closed the app and laughed once, quiet, but real. Healing never feels like a parade. It feels like paying cash at the register and walking out with what you came for. I stood at the window and let the day be ordinary. The road outside was busy again, and I didn't flinch at footsteps. I whispered the words he once threw at me, turned inside out, and made mine. To those who taught me what to be. I meant it. The lesson cost a fortune in love, but it bought me myself. Some truths don't break you. They rebuild you. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moment stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's plenty more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story, with respect and gratitude.